Hey everyone, Brandon here, and I'm here today with Jim Jarvis of Jarvis Performance. How you doing, Jim?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I appreciate you coming on. I'm trying to think. I honestly can't remember the first time that we even met. I know it was through Elite FTS at some point. I think it was probably was it like one of the Learn to Trains or something?
I think it was the last sports performance summit that they
Okay,
had out there. I
okay,
think it was
yep,
2019 that we met.
okay, yep. And we've kind of been connected ever since. And you guys are driving through to go to Elite FTS whenever you go there because we are kind of on the way. I'm assuming for you guys. So it's been nice to get to know you and hang out. The, Today, in terms of discussing training and whatnot, I know that you're really involved in hockey, and this kind of looks like where you've got your start. I guess kind of walk us through what got you into strength and conditioning, and then eventually how that snowballed into the hockey side of it.
So I played hockey. All grown up since I think I first started when I was 4. Played through my first 2 years of college. Um, the guy that actually recruited me got fired the August before my freshman year. So a month before I was on campus, he got fired. So after my sophomore year, I transferred to a different school just to go to school, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. I actually hated lifting growing up because in hockey, all my coaches, including my college strength coach, was like, you can't go too heavy. You can't go too heavy. You're gonna get big and bulky, and then you're gonna be slow in the net. And I look back at that now, and I'm like, I was 145 pounds. I don't think I was gonna get big and bulky anytime soon back then. So going through some different things. I knew I wanted to get into the coaching side of things in the coaching world. I originally thought I was going to get into the just coaching side of coaching hockey. And then I started taking some exercise science classes, some sports physiology classes, and absolutely loved it. And realized, okay, there's actual like science behind this, and once again, that science pointed to I wasn't ever going to get big and bulky and slow in the net as long as I trained hard and kept moving and all that. So, and that was kind of like my intro to it was like, yeah, you were kind of on the right path of things. So, started with that. Started an internship at University of Minnesota-Duluth, and absolutely loved it. Loved being in the weight room. Loved learning about everything. So as that went on, kind of got more into the strength sport side of things. So our coach up there, who I interned under, made us do a strength sport to compete because his big thing was all coaches need to do something. It doesn't matter necessarily what, but he wanted you to do something so that way you could be in the gym training as well. So he gave me an option of only lifting, strongman, or powerlifting. And at that time, I was still like 150 pounds. So I was like, powerlifting and strongman is probably not going to be my thing right now. But I was very hypermobile, so getting into the position for like I guess catching a snatch, things like that, were absolutely no problem for me. So did only lifting for a couple of years. Um, and then when I got out of UMD, I moved out to Idaho and started my career at a private performance gym out there, where we contracted with a couple high schools and a junior college out there. And then after that, got into the college sector, stayed there for quite a while, and then got into the private sector after that.
Awesome. Um, in terms of the the weightlifting side, I'm assuming that also with all your time in the weight room, you were probably from training athletes. Were those coaches that you were under? Were they pretty Olympic heavy, where they were using snatch and clean and jerk in their programming?
Yep, yep, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
So every team that we worked with was doing the Oli list. So
yeah. And then I guess uh, from there, did you just drift towards powerlifting over time, or did you actually just get tired of the weightlifting? Like, how did you move that segment over to going from weightlifting to powerlifting?
so when I was out in Idaho, my very last day that I was out there, I went skiing with my boss that I had out there, and then some of my adult clients that I had out there. We all went out to a ski hill, went skiing for the day. So we started skiing at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and we skied until about 6 o'clock in the evening. Well, out there where we were, it would get up to like 40, 50 degrees during the day, and then it'd get really cold at night again. I didn't put two and two together, so I kind of went cruising into the parking lot where our car was parked without realizing that it was snow in the morning, but it was going to be glare ice at night. So I went cruising into the parking lot, couldn't stop, and my options were to put my shoulder into a car and stop myself that way, or go skiing off a cliff. So I lowered my shoulder and stopped myself with a car. And when I did that, I dislocated my left shoulder, and I could never catch a snatch again without my shoulder dislocating.
Gotcha. So you kind of made a forced move, I guess, from a shoulder mobility perspective.
Yep. So after that, I tried everything. I tried different rehab. I tried like just starting really light and just working up. And after every time I'd get to like not even 60 kilos, it was like 35, 40 kilos each time it would just dislocate.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so after doing that a few times, I got sick of doing that. So moved over to the powerlifting side and haven't looked back since. So
awesome. Does it give you any issues with bench press?
No, actually I have issues with my right shoulder and bench.
Oh, okay.
from other issues from back in high school when I played baseball. So
gotcha. Yep. All right. In terms of the hockey side, so just for some clarity, in Indiana, there is no high school hockey, at least not at the like sanctioned high school level. I know there's clubs for sure, but there's no giant participation in our state. So I've not been subjected to it from a strength conditioning perspective, like in a weight room. So I guess talk about, in terms of working with hockey players, some certain things that you're focused on that you might not be so much with other athletes. I don't want to say it's got to be specific, but obviously they're on ice and they're not running. So that's a little bit of a different demand. And I know that the energy system development also is pretty important there. I mean, matches are pretty long. And then you also got to take into account that hockey's kind of known for having fights. So, I mean, you got to kind of prepare for that to some degree too.
So the biggest thing with hockey is hips. So there's a study that was just done, and it was that 85% of hockey players over the age of 18 had hip labrum tears. Whether or not they're symptomatic or not, they didn't go into that, but 85% had hip labrum tears, and it's just the nature of hockey. Most players play year round, or at least are on the ice year round. They might not be on a team year round, but they're skating year round. And then B, it's a whole different movement pattern. It's not a natural movement pattern because you're going into hip extension with hip external rotation, and then you're going back into hip internal rotation, but you're not actually getting a whole lot of hip flexion. So you're just hammering that hip and external rotation in with the extension. So,
yep.
And it's just over and over and over again, and it's very, very rapid. It's a very high velocity movement. So that's the biggest thing. So starting with hips, and that's kind of one of the big things that I really try and hammer is with my hockey players is, hey, we got to take care of hips. Whether or not that comes from muscle work, by way of like body tempering, or if we do some FRC work, or if we're doing some RPR work, just different things that I try and do with them, with changing up the modality of what we're trying to do. But doing that, making sure we're, actually working through all our accessory work. We'll do a lot of different hip stuff. We'll do hip adductional bands, hip abductional bands. We'll do some hip internal rotation into hip flexional bands just to kind of counteract all the hip external rotation and hip extension. So we'll do a lot of that kind of stuff, and stressing to them that we can't just go through the motion. You got to actually focus on it is a very important part.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them will just go through the motion, and then you're not getting anything done. So So that's kind of the big things with hockey. As far as the energy systems, it's probably the weirdest sport as far as energy systems go because it's very, very high output and then absolutely zero output. And it's constantly changing because you get times where you're out on the ice for 15 seconds and then you're on the bench for 2 or 3 minutes. There's times where you're on the ice for 45 seconds to a minute and a half if you get caught on a long line change, and then you're on the bench for 2 to 3 minutes. So it's a very, very, very anaerobic driven sport. One of the big things with that, and I try and talk to my guys about it, is we can't just go anaerobic all the time because your cortisol levels get all out of whack if we're training anaerobic year round. Some of these guys just want to get on an assault bike or echo bike and just do hard ass intervals all the time, and just go all out every single time they're on the bike. And I'm like, we need to build an aerobic base too. We can't just always be anaerobic doing high intervals. So explaining the difference and explaining why we need to do that has kind of been a thing that they're starting to understand it a little bit, but it's been kind of hard to kind of pound through some of their heads. As far as fighting goes, I've only had one guy that was actually, I can't really call him a fighter because he never really fought. He was a goon, so he started all the fights, and then it would just turn into a brawl with him on the ice.
Yeah.
But he was a smaller guy, so he was never a 1v1 fight guy. He was always the guy that started all the shit. There's actually a video of him on YouTube where he starts a huge brawl because he cross-checks the guy right square in the teeth. And it's just a line brawl after that. So yeah.
In terms of the hip internal rotation work, I'm trying to think how I want to say this. Are you finding that if you can get a hold of them soon enough, that they've still got decent enough mobility to get into the internal rotation, or by the time you're seeing your athletes, is it the opposite way that there's just like no internal rotation available and you're trying to restore it?
I would say the vast majority don't have any internal rotation when I get them.
Okay.
There's been a handful, but most of them, they have very, very good external rotation, obviously, but they're locked up as soon as you try and go into internal rotation with them.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wondered. Are you doing? I know something that people think about in terms of hockey. Are you guys doing any specific adductor work as well for those guys?
Yep. So we'll do hip adduction with bands. We'll do hip adduction on a bench. We'll do Cossack squats, Messier squats, just a lot of lateral movement like that. We'll do like a lateral step up. Pretty much anything to get into the adductor.
Okay. And then a little bit more depth here on hockey. When are most kids getting subjected to the ice and actually playing the sport? Because I'm going to guess that it's like soccer where we're at. Soccer is incredibly prevalent. I'm assuming they're probably getting on there as young as parents can get them on there.
I would say 4 or 5
is
when they start playing. So at 4 or 5 is when you start mini mites, and then mini mites has gone to just basically practices and like mini games. So they'll play cross ice in like one zone, and they'll block off the rest of the ice. Okay. They'll have like 3 games going at a time.
Okay.
And then mites. So mini mites is like 4, 5, 5, 6, and then mites is like 6, 7, 7, 8, 8, 9. So there's like 3 years of mites there. And with mites, especially when you get into that second, third year, that's when they'll start playing full games. And they'll usually play like 10 full games a year.
Yep.
And then squirts is like when you're 9, 10, 10, 11. And then that's when like the crazy games start happening. There's some sport teams that will play like 45, 50 games a year.
Wow. So
So,
you're doing, I'm assuming that's kind of like the equivalent of travel ball and everything else.
yep. So in Minnesota is completely different than the rest of the country, other than maybe Michigan and Massachusetts.
Okay.
But Minnesota, basically every town has a sport team. I mean, there's like Hinckley, where I grew up, is a small town of about 1,500. They still have squirt hockey there. They play up there until squirts, and then they combine with a different school for high school hockey and all that. But yeah, you play up until squirts at your local town team, and you just go from there. So, like, with that being said, I don't even know how many squirt teams there are in Minnesota. There's probably 1,000.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Between all the different levels. So they divide them up into like 3 to 4 different levels, and all 4 levels, will travel to different towns and play. So in Minnesota, like travel hockey and house hockey kind of are the same thing, except for like the very, very, very bottom leagues. So
Okay.
pretty much everybody travels.
Okay. And then in terms of knowing that, in terms of the training that goes along with that, I'm going to guess that our parents, similar to where with like basketball and soccer, once the kids get to be like 7, 8, 9, maybe 10, they start looking for quote unquote speed and agility training.
I haven't had anybody that young look for speed and agility training for hockey yet. It's usually skill training first that they're looking at.
Okay.
So they'll bring them to these skill development people, especially goalies, which
Yeah.
to me is one of the weirdest things ever. Because as much as movement in hockey isn't natural, goaltending movement is extremely, extremely unnatural.
Right.
Because you're going into your butterfly movement, you're putting your hip joints into some extreme ranges of motion, and it's just why some of these parents are putting those kids into that when they're 9 years old. I still don't know.
Yeah,
But yeah, so that kind of level is where they start that. Most of the kids that I've had when they start with me, the youngest they are is 12.
Okay.
So.
And so in terms of your training, what you're doing, I guess you can walk me through different ages. I guess how do you with your main movements, just your general global programs that you're implementing with these hockey kids, what are kind of your big things that you try to check down every single time you're working with them, and how you're determining your exercises and things like that?
So with my young kids, I always start them with just jumping on the turf. We don't do any box jumps or anything like that. We work on just producing force and absorbing force just on the turf and stabilizing. So we'll do that. That's kind of our big thing that we start off with. And then we'll go into like a goblet box squat. I always have my kids goblet squat until they can goblet squat successfully for 5 sets of 5 up to 55 pounds. Once they can do 55 pounds for 5 sets of 5, I know that they can handle the bar. So then I'll transfer them to the bar after that. Now, some of the kids I've had that have started older with me, and it's kind of all right, we got to go type thing, and we have like a year and a half of development left with them. I'll throw them right on the bar and just make sure that they can move correctly with it. If it's really ugly the first couple times, I'll back them down and I'll regress them to a goblet squat. But I haven't had to do that yet, thankfully. So we'll go into a box squat like that, and then we'll do a lot of glute and hamstring work. So a lot of people will think that hockey is a very quad dominant sport. which it can be, but if you can get it into glute and hamstring instead of quad, that hip extension becomes a lot more prevalent than the hip external rotation, and you can prevent a lot of hip issues. So I work a lot glute hamstring work. So we'll do Nordic glute hammer raises, glute hammer raises in the machine. We'll do a lot of different like glute bar lift, glute ham bar lifts, stability ball leg curls, anything that we can get the glutes and hamstrings working together, and making sure that we work synergistically with those is kind of my big thing. So I don't want to necessarily isolate just the hamstring, and I don't want to just isolate the glute as much as I want to make sure everything's working together. So that's kind of our lower body days. So we'll jump, we'll squat, and we'll hammer the glutes and hamstrings. Upper body wise, we do a lot of rotation tosses. So we'll do a lot of metabolic rotation tosses just to get them used to rotating for shots and things like that. Goal is also rotate a ton when they're in the net. They're loading up rotating. So we want to get them used to that rotation. And then we'll do a lot of posterior chain work in the back. So we'll do pull-ups, we'll do rows, we'll do all kinds of other stuff. And then we usually bench as well. Especially with my female hockey players, I have found that getting them strong on bench has improved their shot tremendously. And I've seen a lot of girls that are weak just have little fluttery shots and they can't really get a whole lot on there. And that's actually been huge for some of the girls I've trained that are skaters. Being able to rip a shot instead of just having something that kind of flutters on net has been a game changer for them. So
interesting. And for the athletes that you're working with, approximately how often are you seeing kids?
So I see the vast majority of my kids 2 days a week in season and then 4 days a week off season.
Okay. Awesome. So you got them a good amount whenever they're not really truly playing or supposed to be playing, I guess. And so even with your in-season kids, you're not seeing most of them run into time commitment issues, even with twice a week?
So most of my twice a week kids either come Saturday, Sunday, or they'll come Sunday, Wednesday, depending on their schedule. So The Sunday, Wednesday I've found has been great because the high school sports here don't normally play on Wednesdays, and they always have Sundays off. So, right. So that's been kind of a nice, easy schedule to keep with most of my athletes.
Gotcha. So that's really good that they're able to stay in season. Have you had any kind of kickback from parents or kids in terms of them training in season? I know many parents and athletes usually get concerned that they're going to be sore or they're not going to be able to practice or play well. Have you had any kind of kickback on that?
The only kickback I've ever had on that has come from my swimmers and my Nordic skiers.
Okay.
So hockey players, I don't usually get much kickback on that from.
Okay. And so are you working with the kids that you're working with, or what kind of, are you guys using one-on-one training, or are you doing small group?
It's small group. Although on Sundays I've actually started making the groups bigger, and it's been kind of fun. And the kids like it a lot more, I would say, because then they get to see each other, because they all kind of train with each other at some point in time throughout the year, especially in the summer. Like I'll have kids that train together like on Mondays, and then on Wednesdays they train with a different group. Fridays they train with a different group. And most of them have all skated together at least a couple times with different goalie coaches or different skill coaches. But Sunday mornings have been a time where I've been bringing in like 10 to 12 kids at a time.
Okay.
And that's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah.
So
we work with some baseball and softball girls in like a team-based setting. And it's usually pretty fun and pretty competitive. That we get it brings up the bottom portion of the group a lot because they're almost seen to keep up with the expectation of the rest of the group, and so they'll end up doing more than what they probably actually would if they would just be in a small group by them, or I don't say by themselves, but a smaller group with people that they're not as familiar with. So it does seem to, raise the tide with everybody else. The other thing in terms of hockey that I kind of wanted to hear your opinion on is the the long-term athletic development side of it. You said the kids are starting to obviously play super early, and we know that generally research is showing that it's not the ideal thing to do to specialize early. Is the issue with hockey that everybody thinks that their kid can go play on like a national team, or are they looking at just college, or is it even that competitive, even at the high school level, that if you're not starting at a super young age, that you're going to be left behind? I will say that I don't condone it, but I guess if there's any sport that I guess a kid that I would think might want to start a little earlier, get exposed to, it would probably be hockey, just because of being on ice and getting ice time. It's not like you can just walk outside and do it. You've got to actually probably have a rink and somebody to kind of practice with here and there. But most sports, you usually would make the same argument. You need either a wrestling mat or a hoop, but some of those things are easier to come by. So I guess let me know. I'm interested on your thoughts on the special hyper specialization when it comes into hockey.
Well, first off, I think we need to bring you out to Minnesota during the winter. So that way you can drive by some of the little swamp ponds that we have, and everybody has a net out there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it's easy to actually step outside and just get on ice.
Okay.
Which is kind of funny because, yeah, I mean, you go anywhere south of Minnesota basically, and you're not getting on ice unless you go to indoor rink. But yeah, so the biggest thing that I would say is there's so much pressure to be on the A team starting off in squirts. So the way hockey does it is you have A, B1, B2, C. And if you make the A team in squirts, you are basically on a good trajectory to be on the high school team. And most of the high schools here in the metro area definitely cut kids, especially the bigger metro area schools, which is funny because the two biggest cities in Minnesota are St. Paul and Minneapolis. They actually combine all their schools to make one team, just because it's more of an inner city place, and there's not a whole lot of kids that play hockey in Minneapolis or St. Paul anymore. But when you get out into the suburbs, you get into places like Edina, Minnetonka, and places like that. They'll have their varsity team, they'll have their JV team, and then if you get cut, they have USA hockey teams, which are called Junior Gold in Minnesota, and they'll have up to 5 Junior Gold teams. So they'll have, almost 100 kids that they cut from the varsity and JV teams that still go and play.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you don't play, or if you don't start that skating until you're, let's say if you do kind of like what most football programs do in Minnesota, and you don't start playing until you're 12 or 13 years old, you're going to be pretty far behind, and you're not going to be really in that pipeline to get to the high school team. Okay. Now, with that being said, there is a kid by the name of Hunter Mishka. He is in the Coyotes system right now, I think. He was in the Coyotes system. I'm not sure where he is now. But he didn't start playing until he was 13 years old. And he was just a good enough athlete that he started playing goalie when he was 13. And 3 years later, he was on the U.S. national team, or national development team, I should say. And then he went to the University of Minnesota-Duluth after that, and then he got drafted by the Coyotes after that. So there's definitely stories of kids starting late and jumping in and making it to the pros. there's also, I actually trained this guy. He was cut from the high school team every single year, played junior gold, and then ended up going and played juniors after his senior year, made it through the junior circuit, committed to a Division I school at Mercyhurst, played 1 year at Mercyhurst, and then signed with the Capitals. And you don't hear about those kind of stories very often.
Right.
Where you get cut from your high school team every single year and then end up signing a pro contract. So that was, I mean, it's an interesting deal in Minnesota where hockey is just so prevalent and so competitive in some of these different areas, especially the suburban areas, that, yeah, you have to start early to develop those skills. But then on the flip side, I'm trying to think if I have anybody. Almost every single one of my kids that I have that are in high school right now are at least 2 sport athletes. Most of them are 3 sport athletes. So, and I have a girl that just went to Trine University out there in Indiana.
Yep.
And she's playing hockey and lacrosse out there. So she's staying as a 2 sport athlete even in college. So
what time of the year is hockey usually, like, is it considered a winter sport?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So for high school, so for high school in Minnesota, the girls start first, so they'll start 2 weeks before the guys. So they usually start the first Monday of November, or the first Monday after Halloween is usually how they describe it. So they'll go then, and then the guys start 2 weeks later. And then girls usually get done the last weekend of February. Guys are done 2 weeks later.
Okay. Still kind of similar to swimming around here, if I had to classify it in terms of our sports, in terms of the seasonality. So, with going back to the long-term athletic development side of things, when are you seeing any kind of burnout? Like, are kids getting to high school and being like, I've just played this so much, like I'm tired of playing? Or are they at that point still committed and usually follow through? Because I'm interested to see if, like, getting subjected that early to it, and obviously it sounds like the culture up there is hockey is a thing. I mean, that's kind of what I think of whenever I think of Minnesota is hockey. Obviously the Gophers have had a good tradition with hockey. So how often are you seeing that kind of prevalence?
So at the high school level, not a ton. I'm trying to think of any. I have one girl right now but that was a whole different deal. Yeah, I mean, most of the kids, if they play up until high school, they usually play all the way through high school unless they get cut, and then sometimes they'll stop playing then. But
Yeah.
Most kids that I've seen play all the way through. The burnout kind of comes from when they get done with high school, because a lot of them will have the dream or desire to go play college hockey, but the transition from high school to college is such a grind through the junior ranks that it will take a toll on you. I had a kid that I trained that his first year after high school, he made a junior team as the number 3 goalie. So he practiced all year, didn't get a single minute in the net in a game. And then the 2 goalies that were above him both went off to college after that year. So he was thinking, all right, I'm going to just step right into the number 1 role. It'll be awesome. It's going to be great. And the owner of the team sold it, and they moved, and he didn't even get an invite to the camp for the next season.
Oh, wow.
So then it was find a different team. So he got signed by a team down in Texas, went down there, and then was the last cut. So then he came back. A team in Minnesota signed him, and then immediately traded him to a team in Wisconsin. And with junior hockey, you have what's called billet families. So players will live with a family in their home. They'll feed them, help take care of them, things like that. Well, his billet house was in a trailer park. And not that trailer parks can't be nice, but he described this and he showed me pictures of this place, and it was not where you want to spend the next 9 months of your life.
Yeah.
While you're trying to play hockey as well. So I mean, that took a toll on him. He eventually quit, and he actually still trains with me today. He started training for powerlifting and has gone that route. But yeah, so I mean, just there's things like that with junior hockey. That transition between high school and college is tough, and it'll take a toll on you. So gotcha. that's where the burnout comes from.
So at the college level, are they looking? It sounds to me like it may even be kind of like softball and baseball around here, where colleges are looking not so much at like your high school career, but they care more about your travel. Was that a good way to put that, I guess?
So kind of junior hockey is like college hockey is weird because most college freshman hockey players are 21 years old.
Okay.
So you have 3 years in between high school and college where you go and play and you develop and then you go play college. Except for, you have guys that are very, very high end who go and play when they're, 18 right out of high school. But those guys are kind of far and few between.
So it sounds like it needs. Do you think they're waiting for more physical maturity? You think between that 18-21 that kids just mature a little bit more, and that makes them, I don't want to say, obviously they're going to be better athletes to some degree, but if they're doing the travel stuff, they're obviously getting more skill too. But I don't know if maybe like kind of how college football is for the NFL to go, you got to at least have 1 year, but usually people have several years in the NFL because when you look, they're just not physically ready to play at that next level.
So I think a lot of it is the physical maturity. A lot of it is the U.S. started the junior program and down here to kind of mimic the Canadian junior system, because there would be a lot of Canadian players coming down to the U.S. college ranks, and they would be 21 years old, and then you're having a bunch of 21-year-olds against a bunch of 18-year-olds. So the junior system in the U.S. was kind of developed to mimic the Canadian system.
Okay.
And once that started, then all the colleges are starting to take guys out of the junior ranks, because now if you have 20, 21 year, or 21 to 25-year-olds and you're playing against 18 to 22-year-olds, you're going to be able to be physically much more mature, and you can, be a lot harder on that younger team. You can take the body, you can hit a lot more, and just pound them.
Yep. All right. In terms of, it's going to kind of lead me into some powerlifting stuff, I guess. Walk me a little bit through, obviously you said you left weightlifting to do powerlifting. What was kind of your, I guess, initial introduction into powerlifting for you? And I know you started off raw, so I guess like who were your influences there? And then we'll kind of get into what got you into multi-ply and what after that.
Yeah, so after I realized I could no longer do weightlifting, I got into powerlifting. Just started slowly training, and that's actually kind of when I found Elite FTS. So I started reading their Q&A from way back on their last website. So, the Q&A section had God, just infinite knowledge on it. I mean,
Yeah.
and you could ask a question and you'd have like 5 or 6 different people answering it, within 20, 25 minutes, which was awesome. So that's what kind of got me into powerlifting. So I started that. And when I started my job at Carleton College, I got into finally competing. I trained for about a year and a half. Yeah, probably actually about a year and a half before I competed for the first time, which I think was very beneficial for me instead of just jumping into the platform right away. And then went down that road for the raw road for quite a while, and actually got into coaching powerlifters because I had a track athlete who she had a year off or a semester off, where she had nothing else to do. She had one semester that she had to finish, and she had a season of indoor track that she could do. So she was like, "Well, can I do a powerlifting meet with you while I, don't have school this semester?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" And that kind of turned into me coaching her. And then, we trained together. I coached her. We competed together, and then we've went from there. So that's kind of how that went as far as getting into powerlifting and getting into the coaching of powerlifters. Multi-ply. So I competed raw since 2012 was my first meet. Or no, 2013 was my first meet. 2013 was my first meet, and I had competed raw for about 8 years before I decided to jump into multi-ply. And it was mostly I just wanted to see what I could do. I had squatted 600 in the gym, and then of course I decided to take another little jump after that, right about 6 weeks out from my meet, and I tried to take 615 and screwed up my back a little bit on that 615. But squatting 600 raw was kind of my goal before I jumped into gear. And I figured, okay, well, I hit my 600 raw. Obviously, I didn't get in the meet because my back was a little bit tweaked, but I hit 585 in that meet. So I'm like, all right, it's time to take the jump, see what I can do in multi-ply. So got into multi-ply, and that's been an awesome experience. It's just so much different from raw as far as learning the skills and learning the carryover of the gear. The first time or my first meet, trying to get my first touch in my shirt was the biggest pain in the ass ever.
Yep.
I think I bought a Ray Jacks off Facebook Marketplace from a guy, and I could not get that thing to touch for the life of me. I could 2 board press like 550, I think I had that 2 board, maybe even 575, and getting below a 2 board was just damn near impossible. So I went and saw a guy by the name of Greg Dominga. Actually, he owns a gym in Minnesota as well, and he got me into a different shirt. He got me into a red SDP, and with that, I was able to touch. And then my first meet actually went awesome. Went 3 for 3 on bench. And I found out later, the next week when I went back and brought Greg's shirt back and everything else, the gym had a bet on whether or not I would actually make a bench attempt or if I'd bomb out. And apparently most of them had money on me bombing out. So I took a pretty good chunk of change home for going 3
Nice.
for 3. So, but yeah, so that was kind of my intro into multi-ply. And then been going at it ever since with multi-ply. And I actually just started working with Marshall Johnson as my coach. So that's been an interesting experience. Kind of seeing how different people take a different approach to training multi-ply.
Yep.
So like I was, after that first meet, I was never too worried about touching in my meet prep phase. As long as I could get touch, 2-3 weeks out from my meet, I figured I was good to go. Now with Marshall, I am doing my first 3 weeks in my shirt, where the goal is to touch a weight that is no more than 10% of my raw max.
Oh, wow.
So he's trying to get me to really, truly learn how to manipulate the shirt instead of just adding more weight.
Yeah.
So that's been fun to kind of see the different approaches like that.
Yeah. In terms of, I'm sure, like, even while you were in equipment, what got you using the conjugate method? Was that through Elite FTS and you tinkering with things? Were you taking, like, I don't want to say blanket templates, but were you just like running what generally Westside would do and then just making tweaks along the way? I'm curious on how you kind of evolved how you use that system for how you trained.
So I took some of the stuff through the Elite FTS, and I took some of the stuff from Conjugate U from Nate Harvey.
Okay.
And Nate's Conjugate U is more the template that I use now,
Okay.
just because you get more of the athletic stuff in there. And I actually, so my last college stop was at Carleton College. The college before that I was at was Northern State University out in South Dakota. And the guy out there was a very, 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 very linear guy. Like, linear was the only thing that you could do. There was no reason to do anything other than just linear. And so, like, with football, we started with like 2 sets of 20 on week 1 of their off season. And we worked down to, I think it was like 5 sets of 2 the week before they'd start their preseason camp. And that was we just went straight linear with them. And I saw guys getting hurt left and right. And I'm like, all right, there has to be a better way. This can't be the best way. This is dumb. Like, all these guys are getting hurt. We're not getting any better. So I started reading things. And as well as I came from a very academic, background for strength and conditioning, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I hated lifting just because working up to like 135 on squats and deadlifts every single time and doing like 3x10 through high school and college, it got boring and monotonous. It was like, all right, I'm going to do the same thing again today as I did last week. And that, was kind of the way it was. So, but I came from the very academic side of strength and conditioning, which, is the NSCA, and the NSCA preaches linear periodization.
Yep.
Or at least they did back then. Kind of doing some of the different CSCS, CEUs, they've at least kind of expanded on just linear. It's, gotten into some different stuff, but back then it was all linear periodization. So started reading some different things. Read Dave Tate's article on T-Nation, Periodization Bible, Part 1. And that was kind of my first experience with Conjugate. Then it was, all right, now I need to read all the Westside stuff. So we read all the Westside stuff, and then got Nate's Conjugate U book, read that. And then the Conjugate U book was what made everything make sense. Like the Westside Book of Methods, the first time I read that, I had no fucking clue what Louis. Oh, sorry. You're gonna get a warning on your podcast now. My bad. But anyways, I had no idea what Louis was trying to talk about. Like, I read it through like 2 or 3 times, and it was just confusing as hell. But Nate's Conjugate U made everything make sense. So that was awesome. Understood it, and then started programming with that. So, and just kind of went with there. So the one big thing that I did do at Carleton that I started to do was I actually blended Cal Dietz triphasic training with Nate Harvey's Conjugate U. We would go for the max effort movements. We would do eccentrics for 2 weeks, and then for the isometrics, we do that for 2 weeks of max effort, and then we just do 2 weeks of dynamic effort on both days. And I saw some great results with that. And it's something that I've tinkered with a few times since I've gotten to the private sector. I just don't have the time. Well, actually, I have more time here, but I don't have the resources that I did at Carleton. Like at Carleton, I could have like 5 football guys in at one time, and that was a great way to spot everybody. Because when you're going 120% of a guy's max squat, you don't want just one person trying to spot.
Right.
So yeah. So it was a lot easier to do there. It is something that I want to get back into here, though.
Gotcha. Yeah. I does. What kind of approach does Marshall use? Does he use more of like a block approach, I'm assuming?
So he's kind of all over the place. It's basically, we talked before he sent me on my first program, we talked a lot, and he's like, all right, we're going to get away from Conjugate for you, because that's what you've been running for the last 8 years. So he's like, we're going to get away from that and do some different stuff. So we went just strictly linear with a little bit of a block base. So like we had, all right, we're going to run a strength phase, but we're going to run it linearly. We're going to do hypertrophy phase, and we're going to run it linearly. So that's kind of what we've been doing. Now we're into our equip phase, and we're kind of doing that linearly as well. So
Gotcha.
I'm curious to see what we do when we get into meet prep. So still trying to figure out meet. I was actually thinking about coming out do the spring meet at your guys' place. But we're going out. I'm taking 3 of my lifters out to the women's pro-am the next weekend.
Yep.
And so I'm not sure if I'm ready for 2 trips out there in 2 weekends. So
yeah, we actually have a guy that signed up for our meet, and he actually is I think he lives in Canada, and that was his first thing. Was he just like, I want to know what kind of bars, and he's like, if I'm gonna have to be out to the pro-am, we're just gonna basically stay a whole week, and then on the way back, I'm gonna do our meet while they travel back. So I think they're gonna basically fly into Cincinnati. His wife's gonna do a meet, and then I don't know how they plan to get to Terre Haute, but then they're gonna basically do our meet in Terre Haute and then fly out of Indy back home. So they're making like a whole trip out of it, which is kind of cool. But it would make for a long week, but I can totally understand that. So
yeah. So, and we drive pretty much everywhere. So
yeah.
Just like flying into Cincinnati from Minnesota is so expensive, and then you got to rent a car and all that stuff. It's way easier just to drive, even though.
And it's just a logistical headache to flights, get off the flights, have the Uber get you to wherever you got to go, and then if you got to get to the hotel, then you got to get to the meet somehow. So either got to Uber to the meet or rent a car. Yeah, that's just it's a nightmare.
And it's only a 12-hour drive. Just if you guys could fix your roads in Indiana, that'd be great.
Yeah, they're bad. I know they're really bad.
Although
especially on the interstates.
I will say the tollway, the Indiana tollway up in northern Indiana that runs like from Chicago over to like Toledo, that's actually pretty nice. We took that when we went up to Pennsylvania for Strongman Core Nationals, and we flew across that.
Yeah. It's honestly about pretty much almost everything south of Indianapolis kind of just is not good.
Just forgotten about.
Pretty much, yeah. Unless you're in like Bloomington for IU, or like a little bit of a bigger city. Evansville's not too bad, but once you start getting down there, it's all farmland and whatever. It just doesn't get taken care of like it should.
Yeah.
Just wait the last minute. So the last thing I have for you here is, it sounds like you're trying to find a meet, so that kind of answers some of it. But I guess what is next for you in terms of either coaching, training, competing? I guess what's something you got coming on in the next like 6 to 12 months?
So trying to find a meet right now. Thinking that if it's not your guys' meet, it'll either be Anthony Oliveira's meet in the spring out in New Hampshire, or the Dominguez meet here in Minnesota.
Okay.
Right now, there's some stuff going on, obviously, with the APF, which is what Anthony and the Dominguez ran their meets in, and neither of those two are affiliated with APF anymore. So, trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen with that. So, that will be kind of part one, is figuring that out and then going from there. As far as coaching, I'm actually getting more and more athletes that aren't hockey players, which is kind of fun. Just got a track athlete that is a 800 high jump, long jump girl, which I don't know how those three correlate with each other, but it's been interesting training her lately. So she's probably one of the most fluid athletes movement wise I've ever coached. Like watching her run, it's like watching a gazelle run. It's just easy, springy, fluid movement. It's awesome. Watching her squat. So she's about 5'7", 5'8", and about 90 pounds. And she's a freshman in high school. So I started her just on goblet box squats to get her squatting. And watching her box squat is like, it's one of the best box squats I've ever seen. Like, it is to the T of what you want, which is absolutely awesome. It's been fun coaching that. So that's been kind of fun, coaching wise. All my college kids the rest of my college kids will all be back today, for anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. So be busy with that, these next few weeks, which is always a fun time. Trying to think of what else I got going on. I got 3 people doing a strongman meet in February. 3 people doing the women's pro-am. Sheena Reed is doing her first pro day at the pro-am, which should be fun. We've set some different goals. One of which is the biggest raw total, just overall. And then Amber Hansen decided to enter raw, which is gonna make things interesting. But yeah, so Sheena just totaled over 1,300 at her last meet this spring. So it'll be interesting to see what she can do. Just trying to think what else I got going on as far as coaching coming up. I think that's all the meets that we have truly scheduled. So yeah. Other than that, not much going on. So just getting ready for Christmas here as well.
Yeah. Yep. Couple days away. So, well, that's all I've got for you. I appreciate you coming on. Great to learn about hockey and how you're kind of approaching working your athletes with that. Because, like I said, there's just not a whole lot. Many people are not talking about hockey. I'd obviously be kind of in that niche, and I like learning about it. So I definitely took some good stuff away, and hopefully everyone else did. And then kind of just catching up more on your history of how you got into powerlifting and weightlifting. That's always exciting. I like to hear that. And obviously, all the athletes you're working with, it sounds like everybody's doing awesome. I'm not surprised one bit. And it's been awesome to get to know you guys coming down and supporting some of our meets and just seeing you at Elite FTS stuff. So it's kind of cool how all that stuff brings everybody together. So
absolutely, yeah. I mean, I was talking about this with a guy that I met at the Train Your Ass Off that I did with Dave a few years ago, and the amount of people that I've met through UW-FTS has been just awesome. Like, and it's people I would have never met without that. So between you, Nate Harvey, and Sheehan, Corey, the other guy that I know that from Training Your Ass Off, I mean, just all kinds of different people. It's been an awesome experience, and thankful for a company like UW-FTS to connect everybody like that. So
absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on, and everybody have a good day.
Thank you.